Hello everyone. In this video, we would see the workflow for the forward integration with NetSapiens. And what we would see is just the ordering of users, not the DID and the voice over IP phone. But the DID and voice over IP phone also could be done. So as part of the flow, what we would see is a customer creating a code, adding a few users, and submitting that as an order, and the order would go into the NetSapiens platform to create the users with the default answering rule, associate the MAC address and the DID, and then once all of this is done, we would see how the order is automatically started in OneBill and the charging is initiated. Before we go into the flow, let's look at the different elements configured for the same and how you can tweak the same. Let's start with the first step, which is setting up of the product and configuring the information we need to capture from the user or the elements required to be provisioned on the NetSapiens platform. So here you see that we have a plan called Premium, and we are capturing elements like email, the extension number, the user's first and last name as input parameters. And elements like scope and service code, which are not going to change, we set that up. And if you want, you can allow the scope to be modified from the default value, or we could take this out to say that the scope cannot be modified. We have another plan in OneBill which is charged differently, and in this case you can see that the scope is set differently. It's set to no portal instead of Office Manager for a premium plan. That way, when you buy these two extensions, the user access on NetSapiens is also going to be controlled accordingly. This is step one. Step two is essentially setting up the workflow configuration. What you see here is our fulfillment layer where you can define the workflows, and you could define workflows for different elements. So here I have a workflow set up for domain, and when you create a domain, the flow works like getting an access token from the NetSapiens for the API connect, and then you create a domain. You set up a default user under the domain with default values, so when you create users, you can copy it from there. And you create a default dial plan, dial rule, etc. So when you have all of this done, your NetSapiens domain is ready, and we could also provide access for a user so that they could log into the NetSapiens platform to view and manage the elements. Similarly, you can define different workflows for a customer canceling his service. If you want to do anything on the domain, like locking the domain or so, you could do that. And we could do any other operations if you choose. When you do elements like, the customer hasn't paid and you want to suspend their domain by locking it, we could set it up as part of the workflow under the different elements. Similarly, we have flow set up for an extension creation where you create a user and create an answering rule for the user. For conferences, you do the appropriate elements like creating a conference and then setting the conference answer rule, etc. So similarly, we have all the integrations defined for queues, auto attendance, etc. When it comes to the integration for ordering phone numbers or ordering the phones from Teledynamics, we have flow set up for that as well. And as you can see here, for the device ordering, for example, you have the order that you place and then you try to get the MAC. Once the MAC is obtained, you go ahead and take the obtained MAC and update NetSapiens with the same. Now, each of these elements here could be an automated task like a NetSapiens API call, or you could also put any human interventions you want to do, like a manual task as part of the workflow. The default flow does not have any manual tasks and it's completely automated. The next thing is you can look at how each element is set up. Like for example, if you look at the domain creation, you see that it's a REST call going into NetSapiens. You have the URL that it goes to, and you see a section here where we do the mapping. So you can see the elements on the left, which are all the fields that NetSapiens expects, and the elements on the right, which is what comes from the upstream layer. And you can set default values if you choose to. Now, if you were to change the mapping, add elements, remove elements, you can manage it from this user interface and save it. The moment it is saved, any subsequent processing that happens will go with the updated workflow configuration that you have here. Next, we set up a customer, and while setting up a customer, you provide certain information which will go down to the NetSapiens platform. In this case, I am capturing the name of a domain, which is something that is going to go into the NetSapiens platform. I go ahead, create this customer. Once you create a customer, you can also go ahead and add the different elements you want to purchase for them. So here I'm going to add a standard extension and a premium extension. And domain also, for the first time we ask you to add it. The reason being, we want to capture additional details for setting up the domain on NetSapiens. So if you go into the domain, you will see that you can define what are the different limits, like the call limit, the number of auto attendants you want to support, the call queues you want to support, etc. So if you say you want default values, we could do it, or we could create a domain without any of these limits, and then as part of the users that we add, we can go and update the domain level limits as well. The default flow takes the limits as part of the domain creation. And if you look at the setup of the extension, what I'm going to do is, if you want to customize the pricing, you could do it here. So I'm going to say I'm going to charge $25 instead of $30, and I am going to enter the information for the different elements. So let's say I have my email that I provide. I give the extension number, first name and last name. Once we are done entering all the information that goes into NetSapiens, we can go ahead and submit the order from the billing platform. When the order is submitted, you also get to choose the activation date. Let me just choose the current date and submit it. You would see that the order stays in a status called pending activation, which means a workflow is to be executed. Now let's go and look at how the workflow looks at this point in time. See that the order we have here is OR2502, and you see the elements which has come in, and the system tells you that out of the 3 steps that have to be completed, 1 is done and the remaining 2 are left. You can go into one of this and you can see what time a particular operation was triggered, and this one is waiting to execute. But you could also set up the workflow in a way where each task happens instantaneously. In some cases, we set a delay to ensure that we allow some time lag in the responses that come from NetSapiens. That way you ensure you don't go and retry the operation when it is already being processed in the NetSapiens platform. Now you can see that all the steps are completed. Now let's go back to the billing platform and check the status of the order. As you can see here, the order status has moved from pending activation to fulfilled, and the services are turned up. Let's now go into NetSapiens and see what is set up. So I'm logged in to the NetSapiens platform and I'm looking at SS Corp domain, which we were looking at. As you can see, the 2 extensions we created, 105 Mark Anderson and 106 Mindy Lee, are created. And if you go in and check the extension, you will see the elements that had come from OneBill. So you can see the login name, the time zone, etc., as well as the scope which we had set up has flown into the NetSapiens platform. A default answering rule to ring at that extension is also set up. So this kind of makes sure that an order placed in the billing platform has automatically created the extension. So you kind of avoids you to do the data entry in 2 systems. At this point, if any calls are made, the CDRs would be gathered and it would be automatically processed by our system and the charge is created. This is an example of an order which had part of the elements which were activated. So as you can see, the status says partially fulfilled, which means a part of the order is activated, and it would say which elements are activated and which elements are waiting to be activated. If there is a failure, you would see that the order status will be failed, and the system will give you an option to re-push the order after you correct the elements, so that the workflow can kick in from where it failed the last time, and you could continue from there. That kind of gives you a high level overview of the integration. Thank you.